Okay, buckle up, everybody, because we have our next solar eclipse, the final solar eclipse occurring in Aries for this cycle, and the final eclipse for this current eclipse season happening on, I think it's March 29th, but we'll confirm that when I bring up the chart. My name is Crystalline Sophia. I'm your friendly neighborhood astrological magician, and I love to use traditional astrology and all their techniques that they got really into back in like ancient Alexandria with Claudius Ptolemy. And I like to apply it to what we're going through today so that we can see how everything works with astrology. It works really well a lot of the time. And so one of the things we're going to do today is learn a little bit about how Ptolemy told us we could figure out when the events of an eclipse would actually occur. Spoiler, the events of an eclipse don't necessarily happen just on the day and don't always start on the actual day. Sometimes they get projected out months or even a year ahead or later than the eclipse. In this case, though, it's a little bit different and a little bit more immediate. So we're going to take a look at that together as I draw up the chart. Okay, so now we can confirm it is March 29th that this eclipse occurs here in the Luna astrology program, which is really great if you're getting into astrology and really useful just visually for so many things. We have a lot happening over here in this side of the chart near the ascendant. So when we're looking at a chart, it's always important to identify where the ascendant is. And it's also really easy. So the first house of a chart, regardless of the house system that you're looking at, is going to be defined by this ascending degree. This ascending degree will either be a very thick black line that starts the first house and will have a different degree number here. But since I'm using the whole sign house system, which was more prominently used in the Hellenistic era, when Ptolemy and Valens and others were writing and doing their astrology, I have a house that starts at 0 degrees and just goes to the next 0 degrees of the next sign. So we need to look within this house, this first house, for that ascending degree. So it becomes like its own little placement, and it's right there, 7 degrees of Aries. So we have that, and we see where this eclipse is occurring in relation to that ascending degree. Is it going to be visible and above the horizon, which would be any part of that top half of the chart? The ascending degree is your eastern horizon. It is that sunrise point. So when we're talking about the ascendant, we're talking about what was on the eastern horizon, which of the constellations was rising at the time of the chart. So your rising sign is the constellation of the zodiac that was rising on the eastern horizon at the moment of your birth. And that, of course, lays out the rest of the chart for us. It begins and establishes our map of the sky for that moment. So in this case, we can tell by looking at the sun here in relation to the ascendant that this solar eclipse is happening right before sunrise on March 29th. So right before and during sunrise, we will be having this solar eclipse, which means that in some areas, and if you're in the like upper northeast of the United States, you might see part of the eclipse. Most of it's going over that Atlantic Ocean, Iceland, Greenland, into a little bit of Europe in that more northerly sector, hemisphere that we're going to be seeing it. So it is not a total eclipse in general. It is just a partial eclipse. So there won't be any ring of fire or anything like that. And this does play into our interpretation of it. For as total as the eclipse is, and with my notes here, I do have my research for how total this is. I believe it's in the 90 some percentile or percentage of occlusion. It's 94% occlusion, according to space.com. So 94% of the sun will be covered out or occluded by the moon during this eclipse, which means it's not 100% effective, right? It's just 94% effective, which is still kind of effective. So we will see it partially because of the angle that we have from our vantage point on Earth. Some places will see it, the full 94%. That's going to be, again, in more of those northerly Atlantic kind of places. And some places are only going to see parts of that because we're going to be looking at it from a different angle. In the upper northeast of the United States, we will see just a fraction of that. But if you're elsewhere, you might get to see more. And because it is visible from these areas, we say that the impact of the eclipse is likely going to affect those areas. So this includes the United States. It goes from Baltimore up, I believe, when I was looking at the map. So that includes a portion of the United States. I'm going to say that the United States as a whole will then at least hear about the effects of this. So as we're looking at this, we can go into just assuming that the United States is going to receive effects from this eclipse. And now we get into how quickly and how soon and for how long will we see effects from this eclipse. Don't worry, we're also going to talk about what it means and what the effects will be. But let's start with the timing first. So this is where we talk to Ptolemy. Ptolemy has this theory that where the eclipse takes place on the chart for the location, and you'll see I'm using Washington, D.C., where the eclipse takes place for the location is going to tell us how soon that location will receive the effects of this eclipse. And then the duration of the eclipse in its totality, or in total, is going to tell us how long the effects will last. So as I refer to my notes over here, this eclipse lasts 3 hours and 53 minutes. So we have to convert 3 hours and 53 minutes into days and months and years. And because it's a solar eclipse, for every hour, Ptolemy tells us that that equals 1 year of the effects. So we can tell that by doing some math, which thank goodness for calculators, this is going to last 3 years and roughly 44 days of time for us. So it will begin when we calculate that it will begin, which again isn't always the day of the eclipse itself. Sometimes it can be months later, but once it begins, it will initiate a period of 3 years and roughly 44 days. So like 3 years and a month and a half of the effects that it is portending, that it is foretelling. So when we look to see, okay, when does it begin? We look at the position of the eclipse on the chart. Now, we had already talked about how the eclipse is at the ascending degree, roughly. It's right before. So again, it's in this sort of liminal space. But if we assume that this is in the ascending degree and that it is going to have an effect on this location that we're working on, then this is one of those situations where it is going to have more immediate effects. Now, more immediate effects are actually just the first third of the year from the time of the eclipse. So this is going to begin its significations somewhere between the day of the eclipse and 4 months after. We're going to see that happening. Can we narrow that down more? We absolutely can. So we're going to say that sometime between March 29th and July 29th, 2025, the effects of this eclipse are going to begin. So it's interesting to me, I did notice this, that it's going to take that July falls in that time frame. And again, we're coming into a time in the United States where we're gearing up for the 250th anniversary of the country. So big celebrations may be taking place at this time, as well as we begin celebrating that momentous year that is actually next year in 2026, but will take place during the time of the effects of the eclipse, right? So starting in April, or starting in March through July, sometime in there, a 3-year period is going to initiate. And so within that, we will have 2026, 2027, and 2028 as part of that. And so if we project out, the eclipse lasting 3 hours and 53 minutes means that this could last somewhere until May 2028 through September 2028. Remember, we have to project 4 months out from the first month and 4 months out from that fourth month. So beginning March 29th or through July 29th, 2025, lasting until roughly May or September 2028. And in that time, we're going to have intensifications and abatements of the significations of this eclipse. And the intensification that we're looking at, again, we want to see when will it intensify. In that period of time, it's going to be in the first third again, because the eclipse is happening so close to the ascendant. So we can see that one of the intensifications is going to be around June through December of 2025. So this year, we're going to see some of those intensifications. So it has an earlier time of intensity, and then we see the effects of it roll from there. Mars is the ruler of this eclipse. Mars is the ruler of Aries. And so we want to take a look at Mars and see how Mars is doing. Is Mars fit to rule this eclipse, or is Mars struggling? And there are some things that we can think about here too, of if Mars is fit to rule, Mars being the nature that it has of conflict, challenge, battlement, like all of these more aggressive, active, athletic kind of energies. Mars is the avenger, but also the revenger. So we have to decide, is Mars happy And is Mars more the Avenger, or is Mars cranky and more of the Revenger? This is where it's going to get tricky in this scenario because, again, it's so close to the ascendant. The sky at this moment will probably have some light in it as the sun is getting ready to rise, but the sun is still technically below the horizon. So, technically, we could say that it's still the final hour of nighttime, which would mean that Mars is a bit more chill because Mars is the out of sect malefic during the day. So, if we have a nighttime chart here, then Mars is a little bit more pacified, a little bit more of the Avenger, which is what I would prefer, honestly. So then we look at Mars and we say, if we'll assume Mars is the Avenger in this case, and Mars is ready to, pursue justice of some sort, then Mars, how well is Mars doing it? Mars is in fall in Cancer, so it's a struggle for Mars. Mars is not given a lot of the reputation, the resources, the support that Mars would like to have. Mars is an underdog in that situation. And so we would want to look at Mars's phases again to say when might we see more intensifications and abatements along with Mars's phases in relation to the sun. Now, for helping us narrow down when in that first 4 month cycle we would see Mars helping to initiate these events, we're probably going to look at the time when Mars gets into Leo as our first indicator because Mars's synodic cycle phases actually are going to pop off more like in November because of where Mars is right now. So if we look at Mars, Mars is moving, Mars has finished the retrograde that it was in, and the sun is faster than Mars. So the sun is still cruising through, and we're waiting for Mars to get to its evening set. So it is an evening star right now because the sun sets and Mars is still in the sky. So if you go outside right now, you'll be able to see Mars after sunset as one of your stars. Yes, it is tinged red, so it's easier to spot. And so we're going to say Mars is an evening star right now. The next big event for Mars would be the evening set when Mars starts to disappear underneath the sun's rays. Because this is a longer cycle that Mars has, that's going to happen sometime around November. So that is after our period of initiation for these events. So if I had to guess when we would see some kind of big moment for Mars, to help kick this off, April 18th, Mars goes into Leo and gets out of the sign of his fall. This may be a time that we could look at to say, something's going to happen here because Mars changes condition, comes out of the sign of his fall, and is doing slightly better at that point. It's not domicile, it's not any kind of perk or affliction for Mars, but it's better than Cancer in Mars's opinion. Even though Mars does have triplicity in Cancer, but Mars is in fall there. So Mars would rather not be in fall. So maybe around mid-April, we'll see this start to initiate. And so now we want to think, okay, what's initiating? What are we looking for? What is actually happening? This is where we dive into Ptolemy for a lot of generalization things. And I'm going to keep it a little bit general here because the generalizations are going to apply to whatever our current time and society and everything offers us. So, things that we want to keep an eye out for. Because this eclipse is in the sign of Aries, Ptolemy, in his book Tetrabiblos, tells us that four-footed animals may be affected by this, specifically four-footed dumb animals. And by that, I think we're looking at the animals that help us with labor. So you'd be looking at like cows and the animals of that sort. Because this is a northern terrestrial sign, we are looking at the potential for earthquakes coinciding with some of this. And also, it's a bestial sign according to Ptolemy. Aries is a ram. And so more bestial animals. I'm blending that in with our four-footed animals to say probably the animals of labor or more untamed animals that we're thinking about here. But then we get that Aries also represents domesticated animals. So again, we're saying, okay, fine-tuning that, we're looking at animals that perhaps work on a farm or do work with us. Because this is a solstitial or equinoctial sign, we might look at weather and crop activities of the season, of course, being spring primarily that we're looking at here. And it is an equinoctial sign. It is the sign of the spring or the Aries equinox, depending on your hemisphere. And so sacred rites and worship can also be involved with this. You can see how there's a lot of things that could pop up, and some things have more tallies than others. So this is a close to the ascendant eclipse. So those that are close to the ascendant, according to Ptolemy, also include issues or topics around crops, youth, and foundations. So again, we're looking at there's animals involved here, they're working animals, and crops may be involved. So this narrows it down for us. Then we look at the nature of the ruling planets of the sign of the eclipse and the angle before it. In this case, the eclipse is near the ascendant, so we're looking at Aries again for both counts, and that is Mars. So we're looking at hot and dry effects. We're looking at things that Mars does by temperament. So this is perhaps things that would involve heat and dryness, whether that shows up as droughts, whether that shows up as inflammation or things like that. That's something that we're going to see if that pops up. Then we see the ruling sign of the planet Cancer. The condition of Mars in Cancer is a little bit rough. Mars is in fall in Cancer. So we're going to see that there's some sort of detriment to go along with this. And we're already seeing this kind of thing. The Pisces eclipse, if you remember when I talked about it in the Aries ingress video, which is here on my YouTube, is very much indicating it was birds particularly used for food that were being affected. So we want to just keep an eye on our food sources, our working animals, our animals that help us to cultivate things in our country right now, and just make sure that we're keeping aware of that. Additionally, it is a solar eclipse, and solar eclipses were meant to, or believed to affect kings mostly. In world astrology or mundane astrology, the sun represents the ruler, and then the moon would represent the body of a nation. And the body of a nation is its people. So the lunar eclipse is likely to affect the people of a nation more, while the solar eclipse is likely to affect the ruler of a nation more. So we're going to keep that in mind as well. All right, and because Mars is an evening star in this case, the population that we're looking at of those affected, let's narrow it down to those working animals. It's going to be fewer than half of the population that will be affected according to Ptolemy's calculation. And again, this is visible in northeastern North America, Greenland, Iceland, the North Atlantic Ocean, and most of Europe, as well as northwestern Russia. So all of these locations will see effects from this eclipse, but they're not going to have the eclipse as close to the ascendant as we are. You need to cast the chart for the location to see where the eclipse falls on the chart. This is a chart for Washington, D.C. If we cast it for another location, it would be a different time of day for them, right? So the eclipse would take place either during the night because it's below the hemisphere, or maybe more during the day because it would be more above the hemisphere, depending on the time zone that you'd be casting it in. All right, so with that, we're looking at these effects one more time, beginning somewhere between March and July. And so we could narrow it down possibly to sometime mid-April, knowing that that begins a 3 year and about 1.5 month time frame that we will see the effects to, which would take us somewhere between June and December of, or sorry, between May and September of 2028, with potential intensifications also occurring between June and December of this year. And that is what we get when we analyze this according to Ptolemy in Tetrabiblos. So narrowing it down for you as a person, this is an eclipse, again, that's more effective on larger scale. Leadership is not just the king of the nation. Think about the leadership that you follow, or the role, the examples and role models that you follow in your life as well. If we narrow this down and make it more microcosmic to your life, think about where the leadership is in your scenario and how this might be affecting them. If you want to just take some general like affirmations and things for what we should do during this eclipse, it's an eclipse. So my biggest suggestion, even though I love to do magic, you guys, is to wait. Allow nature to set the stage and then work with the resources that nature provides now that we have a new setting to work with. So my affirmation is I am ready for my moment, whatever that is. I am ready for my moment. Aries is a cardinal fire sign, and so it is very creative. It is very ambitious. It likes to spark things, and so it can be very spontaneous. And so I am ready for my moment is my favorite affirmation for this. I would say if you're looking for what should I do right now, keep doing what you feel called to do. Follow your gut, follow your instinct, acknowledge that fire within you that is telling you what your path and your direction is. Your skills will be ready when they are needed, and you will be ready for your moment. So I hope that this was a really great introduction into mundane slash world astrology from the Ptolemaic perspective. There are many other ways to go through this, but even some of the other sources like Masha'Allah and Abu Mashar that I love to use from Persian astrology refer back to Ptolemy's timing. So it is a pretty foundational technique that we can look into, and you now have this video to refer to as many times as you need to be able to say, is this working for me? And if you are this curious about astrology, and if this feels really fun for you, I do teach astrology, and I would love to have you as part of our really enthusiastic, welcoming, and amazing community in the Modern School of Ancient Wisdom. The link will be below, and you are welcome there. You can learn at your own pace. You can always join our amazing calls, and we would love to have you. We also have a really fun book club. So there's astrology, there's folk magic, there's community, everything that I hope you're looking for to be able to feel really supported and strong in everything that you do. You are ready for this moment, and I hope you have an excellent week.